Black candidates who qualified to become the next pope were stepped over, and Captain Ibrahim Traoré, soldier, revolutionary, and now one of Africa's most fearless voices, didn't sit quietly. Instead, he sent a letter. Not just any letter. A message so raw, so unapologetic, so filled with fire and truth, that it reportedly left the new Pope Leo XIV and the entire Vatican stunned into silence. It wasn't a complaint. It wasn't even a plea. It was a warning. A challenge to the centuries-old silence of the Church. A cry from a continent that refuses to be preached to, while its children die from the sins of global hypocrisy. And now, the world is left asking, what did Traoré say that no African leader ever dared to say to the Vatican? Why are so many clergy quiet, but so many believers suddenly awake? And will the Church finally listen, or once again choose holy silence over uncomfortable truth? In this video, let's break down the letter that just made history. Captain Ibrahim Traoré didn't need Vatican marble to make his words echo. He didn't begin with "Your Eminence" or follow with footnotes of flattery. His letter opened not from the velvet comfort of diplomacy, but from the raw, blistering heart of West Africa. "I write to you from the soil of my homeland," he said, a phrase that landed like a drumbeat against centuries of silence. This was not just geography. It was geography soaked in memory, where the ground carries names of martyrs, where prayers are whispered not under stained glass, but under the roar of foreign drones. This tone alone sets the letter apart. It wasn't a request. It wasn't even a protest. It was a summons, sent from a nation the world often ignores, but that now speaks with thunder. Traoré's voice didn't come from beneath the Church's hierarchy. It rose from beneath its blind spots. He refused to appeal for recognition. Instead, he made recognition unavoidable. He reminded the new pope, and through him, the world, that Africa no longer writes from the margins. It writes from the epicenter of a rising storm. In a single sentence, "I write to you as a son of Africa, bare, bruised, unbowed," Traoré declared something far greater than opinion. He declared that a new chapter had begun, where reverence is no longer blind, and silence from the powerful is no longer tolerated. This wasn't a letter into the Vatican inboxes. It was a message into history itself. Interestingly, Traoré didn't speak to the papacy as a spiritual abstraction. He spoke to it as a system that has historically failed the continent he calls home. While the world celebrated the election of a new pope, Africa remembered something else. That under the shadow of every cathedral in colonial Africa once stood a military fort, and beside every altar, a flag that wasn't African. The letter pressed the new pope to look beyond ceremony. "You inherit not just a church," Traoré wrote, "but a legacy. And that legacy," he explained, "includes more than just prayers and saints. It includes complicity." While Catholic missionaries preached salvation, colonizers enslaved. While the Vatican issued encyclicals, African children were torn from their languages, lands, and futures. But this wasn't merely a history lesson, it was a prophetic demand. Traoré was asking the Pope to move from reflection to reckoning, because the legacy hasn't ended. In modern Africa, the chains are no longer made of iron. They are made of policy. They are the drone strikes justified in silence, the sanctions that crush entire economies while bishops offer platitudes, the fact that the Church continues to make diplomatic visits to warlords in suits while failing to speak truth to power when that power wears a Western badge. And yet, the tone wasn't bitter. It was challenging. It asked the most uncomfortable question a pope could face. Will your papacy serve the powerful, or will it walk with the wounded? Here, Traoré pulled off the priestly veil and stared directly into the Church's own contradictions. The words were surgical. They weren't vague. They weren't gentle. They were confessional, but aimed not at the sinner, but at the priest. He asked the question too few dare ask. How can a church speak of sacrifice while bathing in gold? While cathedrals gleam and Swiss vaults remain guarded, African churches struggle to repair leaking roofs. African believers give offerings from empty stomachs, while the Vatican holds priceless art, land, and diplomatic capital that could move nations, but rarely does, especially not for the African poor. And in perhaps the most direct rebuke of the letter, Traoré named the unholy silence. He exposed how the church remains mute on drone wars, mute on foreign coups, mute on economic strangulation, all while pretending to be an apolitical moral compass. He didn't just accuse silence, he named it as violence. He reminded the Pope that Jesus didn't say, "Blessed are the neutral." He flipped tables, he called out empires, and he was killed for it. Traoré then issued the most piercing challenge of all. If the church could denounce communism in every sermon, then what stops it from naming the sins of capitalism, when those sins kill African children and sell off African futures? The comparison wasn't just rhetorical, it was an indictment. Here, Traoré became the preacher. He didn't just send a letter, he delivered a sermon from the Sahel, one the Vatican could not ignore, and one every African Christian, every Catholic bishop, every global believer must now wrestle with. Before we continue further, tell us, are you enjoying the video? If yes, please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black Africa. Let's continue now. By the time Traoré reached the heart of his letter, the tone had shifted from remembrance to rebuke. This was no longer a historical reminder. It was a warning shot, and it was aimed directly at the Vatican's claim to moral authority. "Silence is no longer holy," he declared, a sentence that felt like thunder crashing through stained glass. It wasn't just a poetic line. It was a strategic repositioning of the Church's role in Africa. For too long, the Vatican had been treated as an apolitical observer. Traoré dismantled that illusion. He redefined neutrality as complicity, especially in an age where injustice is systematic and silence gives it shelter. His examples weren't abstract. He demanded that the new pope speak explicitly about France's ongoing political and military interference in the Sahel. He demanded clarity on the arming of factions, often under the guise of counterinsurgency, that divide African nations rather than unite them. He called out Western corporations that hide behind humanitarian aid while siphoning minerals, controlling currencies, and reshaping education systems to suit foreign profit margins. But most devastating was the theological critique. What gospel is the church preaching, he asked, if it cannot name these sins? If a pulpit can shout against abortion or divorce, but not against drones or land theft, what then has the gospel become? Traoré offered the Pope a crossroads, not a choice. The road of the prophets, or the road of polite diplomacy. One leads to resistance, the other to irrelevance. Traoré didn't just criticize the church. He positioned Africa as its prophetic conscience. He invoked names the Vatican rarely says aloud: Sankara, Lumumba, Nkrumah, Biko. These were not just martyrs of anti-colonial struggle. They were prophets whose words still haunt the halls of power. And with a deliberate stroke, Traoré added his own voice to that lineage. He reminded the Pope that Africa's true power has never come from the permission of outsiders. It has always come from the courage of its truth-tellers. These prophets didn't ask Europe for validation. They exposed its double standards. And like Christ, many were killed for it. Now Traoré asked the Vatican, will it finally listen? This was more than a demand for recognition. It was a spiritual challenge. The Church, he argued, cannot continue to celebrate African saints while turning its back on African struggles. It cannot quote scriptures in African tongues while refusing to name African oppression in European capitals. This is the Africa that is no longer knocking politely. It is Africa that speaks back, with scripture in one hand and sovereignty in the other. It is no longer waiting to be invited to Rome. It is forcing Rome to decide where it stands. And then came the final blow, not with anger, but with brilliance. Traoré turned to the Bible, not to justify himself, but to pierce the Church's conscience. He reminded the Pope of Peter, the very apostle upon whom the Vatican claims its foundation. Even Peter, in a moment of fear, denied Christ 3 times. And it wasn't until the rooster crowed that the truth returned. "Do not let history say the Church denied Africa once again," he wrote. "Let the rooster crow in the Vatican, loud and clear." In that moment, Traoré collapsed centuries of denial, silence, and slow betrayal into a single searing metaphor. He wasn't accusing the Pope personally. He was reminding him spiritually. Even the first shepherd failed, but he was redeemed through courage and confession. Traoré closed the letter with neither curse nor compliment. Instead, he left the Pope with the weight of a legacy and the urgency of choice. This was not diplomacy. This was a biblical confrontation, the kind that turns palaces into temples and soft-spoken popes into warriors for justice, if they dare. Since receiving the letter, the Vatican has remained silent. The press office has issued no comment. No cardinals have responded. But across Africa, the letter has become a legend. On WhatsApp in Senegal, on radio stations in Ouagadougou, in sermons in Kinshasa, in classrooms in Accra, in protest posters in Bamako. Captain Ibrahim Traoré didn't just write a letter to the Pope. He broke the fourth wall of global Christianity. He called out centuries of spiritual betrayal masked as neutrality. He asked the question no one else dared. If the Church cannot name injustice, what is it preaching? He didn't write to be blessed. He wrote to bless the truth. And now the Vatican must decide. Does it remain in the comfort of old alliances, or does it rise to meet the thunder of Africa's rising voice? Because Africa is no longer waiting for Rome. It's calling Rome to account. What do you think? What Ibrahim Traoré said to the Pope was long overdue. Can the Vatican be truly neutral in a world built on inequality? In the comment section below, share your thoughts on whether Africa needs the Church, or is Africa ready to lead its own spiritual revolution? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If yes, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We bring videos on Black Africa, its history, rich arts and culture, and things the world should know about. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.